There is a particular kind of suffering that many people experience in the realm of romantic love, a suffering that seems inexplicable and overwhelming. It is the experience of becoming obsessed with another person, of feeling consumed by thoughts of them, of being unable to function normally because every moment is filled with longing, fantasy, anxiety about whether they return the feeling, despair when they do not respond as hoped. From the outside, this appears irrational, even pathological. The person who is obsessed knows intellectually that this intensity is not healthy, that it is disproportionate to the actual relationship, that it is causing suffering rather than joy. And yet they cannot stop. They cannot free themselves from the grip of this obsession. This is not simply infatuation. It is not the ordinary experience of falling in love. It is something more powerful, more consuming, more resistant to reason or will. And the paradox is this: the more intense the obsession, the less it has to do with the actual person who is the object of it. The beloved becomes a screen, a carrier, a vessel for something that originates not in them, but in the depths of the one who is obsessed. What appears to be love for another is actually an encounter with one's own unconscious, projected outward and experienced as though it belonged to someone else. When we speak of the anima in depth psychology, we are speaking of the unconscious feminine principle in a man, the internal image of woman that exists in the male psyche. This is not a learned construct, though it is shaped by experience. It is an archetype, an inherited pattern in the collective unconscious that structures how a man experiences and relates to the feminine, both internally and externally. The anima is the man's soul image, his connection to the emotional, relational, irrational, and mysterious dimensions of existence that his conscious masculine identity may not encompass. Every man carries this anima. Though most men are not aware of it, it remains in the unconscious, influencing from beneath awareness. And because it is unconscious, it is typically projected. The man does not experience the anima as an aspect of himself. He experiences it as a quality that certain women possess. He sees in particular women something luminous, magical, essential, and he believes this quality belongs to them. He falls in love, or more accurately, he falls into projection. And if the projection is particularly powerful, if it hooks into deep unconscious contents, he may fall into obsession. The obsessive quality of anima projection is what distinguishes it from ordinary romantic attraction. In ordinary attraction, we are drawn to someone because of actual qualities they possess, actual compatibility, actual potential for relationship. The attraction is grounded in reality, in genuine connection between two real people. But in anima projection, the attraction is to something that is not actually in the other person. It is to an internal image, a fantasy, an archetypal pattern that the person seems to embody, but which actually originates in the unconscious of the one who is projecting. This is why anima projection creates such intensity and such suffering. The man is not relating to the woman as she actually is. He is relating to his own anima, which he sees in her. She becomes the carrier of his soul, of his connection to the unconscious, of everything feminine and mysterious and essential that he has not integrated in himself. She is no longer a separate person. She is his anima externalized, and therefore she feels absolutely necessary to his psychological survival. This creates a terrible dependency. The man needs the woman to be who he imagines her to be, because without her carrying his anima projection, he loses contact with that dimension of himself. He has not developed his own inner relationship to the feminine. He has not integrated the anima as an aspect of his own psyche. And so he must find it in a woman, must project it onto her, must keep her in the role of anima carrier, or else face the loss of something that feels essential to his wholeness. But the woman, being a real person and not simply a projection screen, will inevitably fail to embody the anima perfectly. She will show aspects of herself that do not fit the projected image. She will have needs, limitations, flaws, her own psychology that has nothing to do with his anima. And each time this reality breaks through, the man experiences it as betrayal, as disappointment, as evidence that she is not who he thought she was. This is the fundamental dynamic of anima projection. The man falls in love with his own internal image, projected onto a woman. The woman can never live up to the projection because she is not the projection, she is herself. And yet the man cannot see this because he is identified with the projection, believes it is real, believes it belongs to her. The obsession is the ego's desperate attempt to maintain the projection, to force the woman to remain in the role of anima carrier, to deny any evidence that contradicts the fantasy. Now, let us examine the structure of the anima more closely, because understanding what is being projected is essential to understanding the obsession. The anima is not a single image. It exists in layers, in different forms that correspond to different levels of psychological development. At the most primitive level, the anima appears as the purely biological woman, the carrier of sexuality and reproduction, the object of instinctual desire. This is the anima as Eve, as the earthy, natural, instinctual feminine. At a more developed level, the anima appears as the romantic beloved, the idealized woman who inspires devotion and longing. This is the anima as Helen, as the woman of supreme beauty and desirability, the one for whom wars are fought and kingdoms are lost. This is the anima as Muse, as the source of inspiration, and meaning as the one who makes life worth living. At a still more developed level, the anima appears as the spiritual guide, the one who leads the man toward deeper truth and self-knowledge. This is the anima as Sophia, as wisdom, as the feminine face of the divine. This is the anima as the psychopomp, the guide to the unconscious, the one who can lead the man into the depths of his own psyche. Most anima projections contain elements from multiple levels, but they are typically dominated by one particular form. And the form that is projected tells us something about the psychological needs and developmental stage of the man who is projecting. The man who projects primarily the Eve anima is caught in the instinctual, seeking only sexual conquest or biological fulfillment. The man who projects the Helen anima is caught in romantic idealization, seeking the perfect beloved who will make his life meaningful. The man who projects the Sophia anima may be seeking spiritual or psychological guidance from a woman rather than developing it in himself. In all cases, the projection prevents genuine relationship. The woman is not seen as herself. She is seen as the carrier of an archetypal image, expected to fulfill a role that no human being can actually fulfill. And when she inevitably fails to meet these expectations, when she shows herself to be human rather than archetypal, the man experiences disillusionment, often followed by devaluation. The woman who was once idealized becomes despised, not because she has changed, but because the projection has been withdrawn, and the man now sees only what the projection was covering over, an ordinary human being who cannot carry his anima for him. This cycle of idealization and devaluation is characteristic of unconscious anima projection. The man swings between extremes, between seeing the woman as goddess and seeing her as worthless, because he cannot see her as she actually is, a complex human being with both strengths and limitations. The projection creates a split, an all-or-nothing thinking that prevents any stable, realistic relationship. Now we must ask, what creates particularly powerful anima projections that lead to obsession? Why do some men fall into this pattern while others do not? There are several factors that contribute to the intensity of anima projection. The first is the degree of disconnection from the inner feminine. The man who has developed no conscious relationship to his own anima, who has no access to his emotional life, his relational capacity, his imagination, and intuition, is more likely to project the anima powerfully onto women because he has no other way to contact this dimension of himself. In our culture, many men are raised to suppress and deny the feminine aspects of themselves. They are taught that emotions are weakness, that relationships are secondary to achievement, that sensitivity and receptivity are unmasculine. And so the anima is forced entirely into the unconscious, where it remains undeveloped and autonomous. When such a man encounters a woman who seems to embody these rejected qualities, the projection is intense because he is encountering for the first time the dimension of himself that he has never been allowed to develop. The second factor is early maternal relationship. The first woman in every man's life is his mother, and the quality of this relationship profoundly shapes the anima. If the relationship with the mother was healthy, If the mother was a good enough container for the infant's needs and emotions, if she was neither overwhelming nor absent, then the anima develops in a relatively integrated way. The man internalizes a positive image of the feminine, learns that women can be trusted, develops the capacity for healthy relationship. But if the mother was problematic in some way, if she was absent, overwhelming, seductive, rejecting, or inconsistent, then the anima becomes contaminated with these early experiences. The man may develop an anima that is either idealized beyond all reality or demonized as dangerous and untrustworthy. And this distorted anima is what gets projected onto women in adult life, creating relationships that repeat the early maternal dynamic rather than being based on present reality. The man whose mother was absent may project an anima that is unattainable, distant, always just beyond reach. He becomes obsessed with women who are unavailable, who remind him of the absent mother he could never capture or hold. The man whose mother was overwhelming may project an anima that is engulfing and dangerous. He is attracted to intense, demanding women, but fears being consumed by them, creating a pattern of approach and retreat. The man whose mother was critical may project an anima that is judgmental and impossible to please, attracting women who repeat the pattern of conditional love he experienced in childhood. In all these cases, the obsession is not really with the woman herself, but with the unresolved maternal complex, with the attempt to master the original wound, to get from this woman what he could not get from the mother. The projection hooks into deep early material, and this is what gives it its compulsive, obsessive quality. The man is not simply attracted, he is driven by unconscious forces that he does not understand and cannot control. A third factor that intensifies anima projection is the man's own rejected femininity, his shadow feminine aspects. Every person contains both masculine and feminine qualities, regardless of biological sex. But cultural conditioning demands that men identify only with the masculine and reject the feminine. Anything in the man's nature that is soft, receptive, emotional, relational, intuitive must be denied and pushed into the shadow. When these rejected feminine aspects are projected onto a woman, the man experiences in her what he cannot allow in himself. He is fascinated by her emotionality because he has denied his own emotions. He is drawn to her intuition because he has rejected his own. He is obsessed with her relational nature because he has suppressed his own need for connection. The woman becomes the repository for his own disowned femininity, and he needs her to carry this for him because he cannot integrate it himself. This creates a particular bind. The man is attracted to precisely the qualities in the woman that he would judge harshly in himself. He desires her emotionality, but would consider himself weak if he were emotional. He values her intuition, but would consider himself irrational if he trusted his own intuition. The projection allows him to have vicarious access to these qualities without having to own them, without having to challenge his rigid masculine identity. But this vicarious relationship is unstable and unsatisfying. He needs the woman to be emotional, but is disturbed when her emotions inconvenience him. He wants her to be intuitive, but dismisses her intuition when it conflicts with his rationality. He desires her relational focus, but resents it when she wants more connection than he is comfortable giving. The projection creates attraction, but also conflict, because he is trying to maintain a split that cannot ultimately be maintained. Now, let us speak of what happens in the grip of obsessive anima projection, the phenomenology of this experience from the inside. The man who is obsessed thinks constantly about the woman. She fills his consciousness. He rehearses conversations, imagines scenarios, fantasizes about future possibilities. He checks obsessively for messages from her, interprets every small sign as meaningful, reads significance into the most trivial interactions. His emotional state is entirely dependent on her responses. A text from her sends him into elation. Silence from her plunges him into despair. This is not the experience of mature love. It is the experience of possession, of being taken over by an autonomous content from the unconscious. The anima, when it is projected and not integrated, acts as an autonomous complex. It has its own energy, its own agenda, its own compulsive quality. The man experiences it as something happening to him, not something he is choosing. He is in the grip of something larger than his ego, something that has its own power and its own direction. The obsessive quality comes from the fact that the projected anima represents the man's connection to the unconscious, to the depths of the psyche, to the self. When this connection is entirely projected onto a woman, when the man has no inner access to these depths, the woman becomes literally the only bridge to his own soul. Losing her means losing contact with his own depths, with the source of meaning and vitality. And so he clings to her, obsesses about her, cannot let her go, because she is not simply a person he loves. She is his soul externalized, and without her, he fears he will be cut off from himself. This fear is not entirely unfounded. When anima projection is withdrawn suddenly, when the woman rejects the man or reveals herself to be incompatible with the projection, the man often does experience a kind of psychological death. The meaning drains out of life. Everything feels flat, gray, pointless. This is because the anima was carrying his connection to the unconscious, and now that connection has been severed. He is left in a kind of desert, cut off from the source of vitality and meaning. But this crisis, painful as it is also an opportunity. It is the possibility of developing an inner relationship to the anima, of integrating this dimension of the psyche rather than projecting it. When the external woman can no longer carry the projection, when she is gone or has revealed herself to be inadequate to the role, the man is forced to turn inward, to seek in himself what he was seeking in her. This is the beginning of the withdrawal of projection, the beginning of anima integration. But most men do not do this. Most men respond to the loss of the anima projection by simply finding a new woman onto whom to project. They fall in love again, become obsessed again, repeat the pattern with a different person. They do not recognize that the obsession was not really about the woman, but about their own unconscious contents. They believe the problem was that they chose the wrong woman. And if they can find the right woman, the one who truly is what they imagined, then the projection will not fail and the obsession will be fulfilled. This is the delusion that keeps men trapped in the pattern of obsessive anima projection. They do not see that no woman can fulfill the projection because the projection is not about an external person. It is about an internal image, an archetypal pattern, a dimension of the psyche that must be integrated rather than sought in another. As long as the man believes the anima exists somewhere out there, in the perfect woman who will complete him, he will continue to project, to obsess, to suffer. Now we must address the question of how to break free from this pattern, how to withdraw the anima projection and develop a conscious relationship to this inner figure. This is the work of individuation in the sphere of the anima, and it is not quick or easy. It requires first recognizing that one is projecting, that the obsession is not about the actual woman, but about unconscious contents. This recognition is often resisted because it is painful to acknowledge that what felt like the deepest love was actually a kind of psychological delusion. But the recognition is essential. The man must see that he has been in love with his own anima, not with the woman herself. He must acknowledge that she was never the perfect being he imagined, that she was always a real, flawed, complex human being who happened to carry his projection. This seeing is humbling. It requires admitting that his perception was distorted, that his feelings were not based on reality, that he was not in genuine relationship but in a kind of trance. Once the projection is recognized, the work becomes to withdraw it, to take back the energy and content that has been placed onto the woman and to direct it inward. This means developing a relationship with the anima as an inner figure, as an aspect of one's own psyche, rather than as something that belongs to an external person. This inner relationship can be cultivated through active imagination, through attention to dreams, through creative work, through any practice that allows dialogue with the unconscious. In active imagination, the man can engage with the anima directly, can encounter her as an inner figure, can learn what she wants, what she represents, what she is trying to bring into consciousness. This direct relationship removes the need for external projection. The anima can be known and related to internally, and the man can develop in himself the qualities she represents. Emotional depth, relational capacity, intuition, connection to the unconscious. This is not a quick fix. The anima is a complex and powerful archetypal force. Developing a conscious relationship with her is the work of years, perhaps of a lifetime. But it is the only way to free oneself from obsessive projection, to move from being possessed by the anima to being in relationship with her, to transform the compulsive seeking of the feminine in others into the conscious integration of the feminine in oneself. As this integration occurs, the man's relationships with actual women change fundamentally. He is no longer desperately seeking his soul in them. He is no longer projecting the anima onto them and then demanding they fulfill this impossible role. He can see women as they actually are, can appreciate their real qualities rather than the projected fantasies, can relate to them as separate individuals rather than as anima carriers. This does not mean the end of romance or attraction. It does not mean relationships become cold or purely rational, but the quality of attraction changes. It becomes based more on genuine compatibility, on actual connection between two real people, and less on projection and fantasy. The intensity may be less overwhelming, less obsessive, but the relationship has more stability, more reality, more possibility of genuine intimacy. Now let me address a particular form of anima projection that is especially common and especially destructive: the projection of the anima onto a woman who is unavailable, who does not return the man's feelings, who is married or in another relationship, or simply not interested. This unrequited obsession is one of the purest forms of anima projection because there is no reality to contradict the fantasy. The woman remains at a distance, remains perfect in imagination, never has to be seen in her actual complexity and limitation. The man who is obsessed with an unavailable woman is in a kind of paradise of projection. Because there is no actual relationship, there is no reality to tarnish the ideal. He can maintain the fantasy indefinitely, can continue to see her as the anima incarnate, can suffer beautifully in his longing without ever having to face the disappointment of discovering that she is human. This is a seductive position because it feels so meaningful, so intense, so romantic. The suffering itself becomes precious, becomes proof of the depth of the love, becomes a way of remaining connected to the numinous quality of the anima. But this is also a dead end. The obsession with the unavailable woman prevents any actual relationship, any genuine connection. It keeps the man locked in fantasy, in projection, in suffering that feels meaningful but actually prevents growth. The anima must be withdrawn from the unavailable woman and brought into consciousness, into inner work, or else the man remains frozen in obsession, unable to move forward, unable to have real relationships, unable to integrate the feminine dimension of his own psyche. Let me speak also of the role of the mother complex in anima projection, because this is often the deepest layer of the dynamic. The mother is the first carrier of the anima projection. The infant boy projects onto the mother all the qualities of the feminine, experiences her as the source of life, nourishment, comfort, meaning. And to the extent that this early maternal relationship was troubled, to the extent that the mother failed to provide what was needed or provided it in a distorted way, the anima becomes contaminated with this early experience. The man whose mother was cold and distant may develop an anima that is always unattainable, always just beyond reach. He projects this anima onto women who are unavailable, who cannot love him, and he repeats endlessly the pattern of trying to win love from the cold mother who could not give it. The obsession is the attempt to master this early wound, to finally get from a woman what he could not get from his mother. Or the man whose mother was seductive and boundary violating may develop an anima that is dangerous, engulfing, that threatens to consume his autonomy. He is attracted to intense, demanding women, but fears being swallowed by them. He oscillates between obsessive pursuit and terrified withdrawal, never finding a stable relationship because the anima is contaminated with the fear of maternal engulfment. In both cases, and in countless variations, the anima projection is driven by the mother complex. The man is not really seeking a partner. He is seeking to resolve the early maternal relationship, to heal the wound, to get what he needed as a child and did not receive. But this cannot be done through projection onto another woman. It can only be done through inner work, through processing the mother complex, through developing a relationship to the anima that is separate from the mother image. This work often requires therapy or analysis, especially if the mother complex is severe or if there was significant early trauma. The contaminated anima must be separated from the mother image, must be cleansed of the early distortions, must be allowed to develop into a mature inner figure that represents not the personal mother, but the archetypal feminine in its full complexity and depth. As we approach the conclusion of this reflection, I want to emphasize that anima projection and the obsession it creates is not a sign of deep love or romantic sensitivity. It is a sign of unconsciousness, of split-off psychic contents, of developmental work that has not been done. The man who obsesses over women is not more loving than other men. He is more unconscious. He has not integrated the anima. He has not developed a mature relationship to the feminine, either internally or externally. And until he does this work, he will continue to project, to obsess, to suffer. The suffering itself can become a trap. It can feel so meaningful, so deep, so proof of one's capacity for great feeling that one becomes attached to it. The obsession becomes an identity, a way of feeling alive, a substitute for genuine relationship and genuine inner development. The man becomes addicted to the intensity of the projection, to the highs and lows of obsessive love and actual relationship, which is steadier and more grounded, comes to seem boring by comparison. But this addiction to intensity is a refusal of maturity, a refusal to do the inner work of anima integration. It is a way of remaining in the position of the eternal youth, the pure eternus, who pursues the ideal feminine, but never commits to any actual woman, who remains in the realm of fantasy and projection rather than engaging with the reality of relationship. Breaking free from this pattern requires a kind of death, a death of the romantic fantasy, a death of the identification with the suffering lover, a death of the belief that the perfect woman exists somewhere who will make everything complete. This death is painful. It feels like loss, like disillusionment, like the end of something precious. But it is also liberation. It is the possibility of mature relationship, of genuine connection with real women, of integration of the anima as an inner figure who guides and enriches rather than possessing and obsessing. If this exploration has illuminated something in your own experience of romantic obsession, if you recognize the pattern of anima projection in yourself, I invite you to support this channel by liking this video and subscribing to Psyche and Meaning. This work exists for those who are willing to examine the unconscious forces that drive their romantic attachments, who are committed to withdrawing projection and doing the inner work of integration, who understand that genuine love requires consciousness as well as feeling. Your engagement helps this content reach others who are struggling with these same dynamics. And so we return to the beginning. Romantic obsession is not mysterious or inexplicable. It is the result of anima projection, the man falling in love with his own unconscious contents as they appear reflected in a woman. The intensity of the obsession is proportional to the degree of unconsciousness, to the amount of psychic content that has been split off and projected. The beloved is not seen clearly. She is seen through the lens of the anima, transformed into something archetypal, burdened with the impossible task of being a man's soul. This cannot work. The projection must be withdrawn. The anima must be integrated as an inner figure. The man must develop in himself the qualities he has been seeking in women. Only then can he relate to actual women as they are. Only then can he have genuine relationship rather than obsessive projection. Only then can he be free from the compulsive pattern that has caused so much suffering. This is the work of individuation in the realm of the anima. And while it is difficult, while it requires facing uncomfortable truths and giving up cherished fantasies, it is also the path to freedom, to maturity, to the possibility of love based on reality rather than on projection. The anima waits to be known not in the external woman, but in the depths of one's own psyche. And that is where the journey must ultimately lead.